I'll do that again. Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to call to order the Issaquah City Council Services and Safety Committee January 8th, 2019 meeting. I am Chris Ray. I am the chair. With me this evening are Council Deputy President Mariah Batiste and Council Member Victoria Hunt. We have a single agenda item for this evening. We're going to get an update on economic development through the end of 2018, presented by looks like a whole bunch of people, but Christopher Wright is at the podium, so I'm going to give him credit for the presentation this evening. Welcome, Christopher. Take it away.
Well, thank you. As you said, my name is Christopher Wright, and since July of last year, I've been acting as Economic Development Manager in the city's Economic Development Department. Here tonight also is Tim Dutter, who's the other Economic Development Manager, and of course Keith Niven, our Director, and also in the audience tonight is Jeff Howlett, who is the Chair of the Economic Vitality Commission. And we're going to kind of tag team this presentation this evening. And what I will be talking about briefly is our business retention and expansion activities. I'll talk a little bit about what the Economic Vitality Commission has been working on and will continue to work on. Then I'll turn it over to Tim to talk about the Port of Seattle grant, and also the IPZ for sports medicine and the Destination Marketing Organization, or DMO. He's going to be our acronym guy tonight. And then we'll turn it over to our closer, Keith, to talk about jobs. In 2018, the Economic Development Department visited approximately 60 businesses to conduct what we call business retention and expansion visits, where we kind of go through a questionnaire with businesses all throughout the city to kind of get a sense for how they're doing, what issues they're facing, and how we, the city, can help. And in addition to those 60 BRE visits, we additionally met with businesses along the Gilman Corridor to kind of solicit their input on the Gilman Corridor plan, and also coordinated with the Office of Sustainability on outreach regarding their salmon-friendly trips program this past late summer, early fall. We also met with key stakeholders both in Old Town and around the park and ride lots to talk about the parking study, which you'll be hearing much more about very soon. And then also we coordinated the job fair at the Pickering Barn this past year, our annual job fair that was attended by approximately 40 businesses, had booths there. And also this past fall hosted a brokers forum up at Sanmar, where with commercial real estate brokers, and there were about 25 or so brokers there. We continue to work closely with our partners, the Chamber of Commerce, in participating in and helping coordinate their education and networking events, including Chamber 101, their business roundtables, and their Great Career Conference, which was just held at Bellevue College this past December. It was a big success. And we're also work closely with the Downtown Issaquah Association, helping to coordinate their special events. And we'll be working with them this first quarter to apply for and hopefully receive Creative District designation from the state. And we're also very much looking forward to this coming March. The National Main Street Conference is going to be held in Seattle. And one of the days during that conference is going to be a tour of Issaquah. Kind of a walkability tour of downtown Issaquah. Again, that's at the end of March, and I would strongly encourage you to attend or participate in that. The Economic Vitality Commission last came before you, I think, in June of last year. We try to come twice every year to give you an update. And since that time, the EVC has had a retreat, an off-site retreat. That's what the picture of that good-looking group is there, up at Talus Timber Ridge. We had that, and that was serving as kind of an orientation for new EVC members and kind of a reorientation for members that have been on the commission for a while. Some of the EVC members also helped in our business outreach for the Gilman Corridor program, meeting with businesses along Gilman. And also the EVC drafted a couple of position letters that were presented to the council this past year on issues that you were grappling with. One of them was on formula businesses, when you were talking about that earlier in the year. They've also drafted a letter on the Gilman Corridor framework, which if you haven't seen it yet, you'll be getting it very soon, I know. Continue to use the EVC as kind of a think tank and sounding board for all the issues that are confronting businesses in Issaquah, and included in that is getting their input on the vitality element of the citywide strategic plan, the economic vitality element. And we also go to them for input on projects that we're working on, like the parking study and the transit-oriented development, the DMO and IPZ. We continue to seek their input on those types of projects. And then finally, towards the end of the year, we're looking forward to what the EVC and we will be working on this coming year as part of our ED strategic plan update, kind of on the heels of the citywide strategic plan. It's time for us to update the economic development strategic plan. And we've kind of asked the EVC to focus on a few things to prioritize this year. And those three things that they focused in on were jobs, branding and marketing, and then also starting to research possible incentives for businesses in the city. So we'll look forward to reporting out on how those go this next year.
Councilmember Hunt?
Could I ask for an explanation of what kind of incentives you're talking about?
Business incentives to attract businesses to the city that currently we don't have any, and most East Side cities don't have incentives. So we want to just start to research what kind of possibilities there may be with regard to those.
Are there any incentives that you're contemplating, or is it sort of an open field? I was thinking the same thing, or open field?
We're just starting. We've established that as an issue we want to look more at and do some research on. We don't know yet, but that's what we'll be starting on.
Deputy President Batiste?
And with your jobs, branding, marketing, and incentives, are those sort of in order in terms of when the commission would be?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's on next week's meeting agenda, is to kind of prioritize of those three which ones to focus on.
Okay, great, thanks.
Before we let you go, I have a couple more questions for
Sure.
you. I think you referenced something called a creative district. Mm-hmm. What is that?
So that's a new statewide program that you apply to become a certified creative district. And right now what that will do is just help attract, there's a tourism piece and attracting businesses just so that we can become known as a center for arts and cultural activities. And a lot of things that are already downtown that certainly the creative district designation is a new thing. And Issaquah, if we're not a creative district, I don't know what is. So
Absolutely.
It's a formal certification and designation that we'll be applying for through the state.
So when you've been out there talking to our local businesses, there's two areas that you mentioned that I'm curious about the reaction. One is the parking study, and the other is transit-oriented development. Is there any kind of vibe you get back from our business community on those two topics?
First, with regard to transit-oriented development, I know so many of the businesses that I've talked to expressed issues with regard to be able to maintain and attract employees. And that's because employees are just forced to live so far away. And that's a lot bigger issue than I thought it was before I started talking to the businesses. So being able to find more affordable housing in the area to support their employees is a big issue. With regard to parking, again, we talked to businesses in the Highlands, and we'll be talking more about this next week, and businesses around the SR 900 Transit Center. There was a concern about overflow parking Again, we'll get into this next week. We didn't find that there's not as much overflow as we had initially thought. And certainly, the businesses in Old Town, there's the perception that there's a big parking problem, and you'll see the data on that next week as well. So like I said, that's a much bigger conversation that we're just going to be starting up.
Awesome. I'll just be patient, I guess.
Okay.
All right.
All right, and I will now turn it over to Tim. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Tim Dutter, Economic Development Manager. So I apologize for not being at the last Services and Safety meeting. I was out of town. No, I was at the EBC meeting because we had a lot to cover that night. But Keith did talk a little bit about the Port of Seattle Economic Development Grant, so I wanted to start off with this. As you know, it's a 2-to-1 match, so every dollar we put in, they match $2 on it, so we've got 3 to work with, basically. It's based off a city's population, which is why you see the 34.5. We match those funds in economic development with $17,250 for a total of $51,750, so we get a good bang for our buck. So that's just kind of, it's been around for 2 years. They vote it to re-up it every year, so it's not in writing that it'll always continue to be there. We don't know if it will be, but we're lucky enough to have this grant from the Port of Seattle. And it's for the entire King County, with the exception of Seattle. In 2018, this is what we used our Port of Seattle economic development dollars for. 425, we had planned to send a business from Issaquah to the program in Barcelona, Spain, for training on how to enter the global market. We couldn't find enough companies on the east side cities through 425 to do that, so that program never got funded. And we couldn't move those dollars around. So we can move them around if we go back to the port, but we can't change them from different buckets. So that money, that's why you didn't see the full amount get used. And then the chamber, we had budgeted $10,500 for them to do the chamber university courses, and they didn't end up spending all of that. So that's why you see the discrepancy in the numbers.
President Batiste?
Tim, can you just remind me what the grant, what's the overall focus of the grant?
Sure. So the Port of Seattle decided that enough cities, they wanted to help out the east side cities and the cities in King County, and they wanted to help us do economic development to fund certain projects, basically.
So it's just high-level economic development. It could fall
Sure.
into a variety of different buckets.
Sure. So really, let me touch briefly on that. It can be used for several different things. So it can be used for small business development, business recruitment initiatives, industry retention, tourism development, downtown revitalization, commercial or industrial property development, and other economic development projects. What it can't be used for is capital projects. There's the rub. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So this is, I'm just going to touch briefly on these. I won't go through the amounts. But we put money into the AVP's traffic plan to get people in and out of Lake Sammamish State Park. We won't be doing that again this year. We paid Takeda Bethune, the people that did the VIP party, to do the traffic plan because at the last minute we decided that the one that the AVP submitted wasn't going to be very efficient. So we hired them to do that traffic plan. That pays for the flaggers, the volunteers, the VMS reader board signs, all of that. So like I said, this coming year we'll have the AVP pay for that. We put money aside for Visit Issaquah and the DMO. We didn't know exactly where it was going to be, but we wanted to earmark some money in tourism for them. And then because it took longer than I thought to get it to stand up, we started to put some of our money into tourism. So I had to go back to the port and say, can I still use this money in tourism in different places? So we sponsored the International Geo Coin Fest, which really utilized the port. We did the Chamber University with the Chamber of Commerce for our local businesses on different workshops and classes. I joined the Seattle Sports Commission because we're very much focused on sports medicine and outdoor recreation. I thought it would be good to utilize those connections, and I can touch base on that a little bit more. Fabco Consulting Company, as we know, we have the Sports Medicine Conference or Combine coming, so we put Fabco under contract to kind of get that ball rolling and help us organize that and what it would look like. And we did some upgrades to our website. They're not finalized yet, but we're working on putting more data. If you look at our economic development profile on the website, it reads more as a blurb and kind of the history of Issaquah. Typically an economic development profile, what you see is more data and numbers on demographics and the workforce and your largest employers. So we're working on putting that up in that place. So that's what that money was used for. And then the graphic design company Artitudes was hired for the sports medicine to create their brand image and logo, which you'll see in just a minute. Any questions on what we did in the 2018 Port of Seattle funds?
Councilmember Hunt?
So 2 questions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what the Chamber University materials covers, and then also when we would expect to see the new developments on the website.
Okay, so the Chamber University courses, we work with the Chamber of Commerce, and we go to they have their sector lunches. Every month they do a different economic sector and they hold a luncheon. So we use some of the feedback from those companies on what they're looking for in classes, and we also used our survey last year that we did the year prior or 2 years prior to on basically what topics they want to learn. She had the 4 R's, and I can never remember them. So the program that it's called is Create Buzz. So I did a class last year on permits and processing for the city and licensing.
It's up there.
Are they up there? Oh, they're right there. Retention, recruiting, revelations, and regulations. So we did, Chris actually taught one of the classes on permits and licensing. Retention was for employee retention. As you just mentioned, businesses are having workforce issues. So there was a class on that. Recruiting, revelations was kind of paradigm shifts in what's happening in business. But those were their classes last year. I'm working with the Chamber of Commerce now for next year. And we're trying to nail down those topics. One of the hot ones she keeps hearing about at the Chamber is QuickBooks. People want to take a class on QuickBooks. Marketing is always a hot topic. Businesses always want to learn more about marketing. And then one of the interesting ones that we're kind of throwing around is how do I say this? Emergency safety in your business, like a live shooter class, basically. We think that might be interesting. So that's what we're tossing around. We haven't nailed down our subjects for this year. That's what we're out working with the businesses saying, what do you want to have these classes on? We'll bring in and pay for the expert speakers basically in the venue.
Then the second part of the question
Sorry, I
was
forgot
about the
what was the
website.
second.
The website, just when do we expect to see those updates?
So at the end of the presentation, I can show you what it's looking like. The hard part is we've got the design and we've got all the data that we want, which is the hard part. Now the tricky part's going to be to make it jive with our website, with the city's website. So that's where we're at now. So we've kind of got what we want, but we've got to make it fit into our system. So that's why we're not done yet. I don't have an anticipated date for that yet. I apologize.
Well, Tim, what's the process been to decide where we do make grants or make expenditures?
Sure,
within
so
the
we
Port of
discuss it
Seattle?
in our economic development team. So, and 2019 is right after this, and we wanted to get your input on it as well. So, but yeah, it's our team basically.
Does the port have input into where we, or how we spend money, or does it pretty much up to us?
Yes, so I have to fill out an application with deliverables, measurables, metrics, and if they don't like it, they kick it back to me and I adjust it and send it back. They want more, they like what we do. I've gone and presented what we do at the port because we spread ours out so much, and a lot of other cities will just put it into 1 or 2 projects. They like that we spread ours out, so I've gone and presented at the port on what we do. But yeah, it's a process where we sit down in our economic development department and say, what do we want to use these funds for next year?
Anything else? Going.
Okay. So 2019, this is what we're projecting to use these funds for the Port of Seattle, and this is a great time to discuss it with council members. As you know, we're working on entering into a interlocal agreement with Startup 425 with the other East Side cities. It's going to be housed out of Kirkland. The $15,000 that we're putting towards it is what the other cities are putting, and they're using the port grant as well. And that's basically to cover the administrative costs, to schedule the workshops, to maintain the website, things of that nature. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket, we're starting to look at marketing. So we're trying to recruit businesses, and we're trying to retain the ones that we have here. We're starting to say, hey, we need to do some marketing for Issaquah. So we've earmarked a lot of money in 2019 to start going out and try to really attract those companies and start doing some marketing. We've dropped the chamber's budget a little bit down to $4,500 because they just haven't been spending as much, and we'll probably only do 4 classes this year instead of the 6. And then the last one, we've just kind of earmarked some money for some of our workforce programs. The chamber I know right now is working on a young professionals group. I'm trying to work with Eric to bring in cultural conversations into Issaquah. And then this isn't actually a small business roundtable. It's going to be, the chamber has their date set. It's April 25th. It's going to be a regional business summit, and it's going to be held in Snoqualmie. So we're going to help them out with that a little bit. So this is what we're thinking of for 2019.
Deputy President Batiste?
Thanks, Tim. I know in our last conversation, we talked about Startup 425, and I'm sort of drawing back to that conversation. I think that we were a little bit up in the air about participation, and so I still see this coming forward in 2019. So I don't know if there was a conversation or further examination of the program after we discussed.
It's my next slide.
Oh, okay. I'm ahead of the game.
No problem. Any other questions, any comments or questions on 2019?
Councilmember Hunt?
I had another question on the Chamber University. Is this the whole budget for that program, or are there other?
Yes. No, this is the budget for it.
Okay. And then also the IPZ Sports Medicine Marketing. So the IPZ Sports Medicine program, that has a separate source of funding, and this would be a marketing component.
So
on top of
we haven't
it?
kind of decided how we're going to use this for marketing. So we want to use some of it to market the conference, the combine, and the event. We want to use some of it for economic development marketing to put together some marketing materials for the ED department. Think of folders with data and whatnot, things of that nature. So when I put the bucket together, I just put it all into marketing, basically, to include the IPZ, sports medicine, and the conference.
$425.
Startup 425, so there was some discussion at the last services meeting, services and safety meeting. Is it a program or is it an entity? Right now, it's a program. What we want to do is we want to see it move into an entity, either become tucked under the umbrella of another nonprofit or to become its own nonprofit with a full-time staff and to have full funding. So we want to see it go this direction. Right now, Kirkland's going to house it for the next year and kind of help steer it into that direction. And then they're also forming an advisory board right now with business leaders from each of the 5 cities that will help to get them to this spot, to where they want to be. We will have 2 of our business reps on it. I think I have another slide on 425. The foundation series, again, the attendance, so in the spring, the max that it holds at the library is 30. They cap it at 30. So we knocked it out of the park. We're almost at 100% capacity. So the numbers did dip in the fall. I think that one of the reasons that happened is the 425 website had some errors on it. And Christopher was at some of those courses where people thought they were showing up to a finance class and it was a marketing class. And we need to make sure that we work on that and we don't have those problems this year. It causes confusion. The other thing that we're working on is for that website is to kind of build a roadmap out, because it's a menu. So you can kind of pick and choose which courses and workshops you want to attend, and there's no certain order, but people don't know that. They think if you go to Issaquah for one, that it's basically like a cohort moving through, but it's not. You can take one here and then in Renton, and then there's no specific order. That's confusing people. So we're working on, like I said, a roadmap and kind of explaining that you can attend them in any order. So that's one of the reasons I think to drop. And then I think we just need to do a better job at the city level. We've got to push it out a little bit more. We got to market it a little bit more in the fall. But if you see, we've got, compared to the other cities, our attendees are from a very diverse background and very much female attended. So, questions on the series?
I think in our last conversation, we talked a little bit too about if there was data around the success from these programs or the impact of these programs. Is there any data about if they're going to learn how to start up their own business, did they then go and have their own business, that kind of?
So overall, they do the surveys at the end of the workshop, and they receive very high marks. I mean, they're getting 9s out of 10, so people are happy with the instructors and with the courses. The data that I reached out to get that data. They don't have it yet. They're doing it right now. Actually, the survey's live right now. They're trying to get the people that have attended the workshops to say, did you start a business? How far along are you? What they do know is how many people have moved on to one-on-one mentorship with the SCORE mentors that teach the courses, and it's a pretty high number. It's between 20 and 40 out of our 2 series. So I'd say about 1/3 or 1/4 of them are moving on in some capacity, but we don't know. I should be able to 6 months to give you an update on those numbers and see how many actual businesses or how many people have moved forward and taken the next step.
Is the mentorship a part of the program, or that's that they?
It'd be the next level, so it's them moving on to the next step. So if they work with that SCORE mentor and they sign up and they start working with them one-on-one, that's the next step after the series, basically. It's good news to see them moving forward.
Okay, yeah, I will be very interested to hear at some point about if people are successful in starting their own businesses or see increased,
Productivity.
Productivity,
Yeah.
yes.
I will have an update for you in 6 months. We'll have that data.
So we talked about starting a new business, and entrepreneurship is part of the objective of 405, or Startup 405. Are there any specific goals or objectives or mission statements for the organization that we can point to and say, the reason for this entity is to do boom, boom, boom?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's to provide those resources for entrepreneurs. Otherwise, where would we send them, right? So we can work with them one-on-one, but we would be busy doing that all day if we did that for every single person that came in the door and wanted to start a business. Whereas if they go to these courses, this is what the East Side partners have kind of decided would be a good program for entrepreneurship in this area because we have so many entrepreneurs.
Yeah. One of the things I think I'd like to see going forward, and I'm not asking for anything today, but think about this, is helping entrepreneurs is great, but what does this do for the community? So kind of take a couple levels of abstraction beyond that and say, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve here? That is, we're going to drive more economic development or more enterprises into the city, whatever, because I'd like to see us measure some of those outcomes, not just like the inputs, which is, this many people attended, and here's their demographics. I'd like to be able to, on a longer planning horizon, say, here's what we've actually accomplished from this investment.
Okay. Goals and measurables.
Did you get your 425 questions answered?
I did, and you just covered one.
Okay.
So, good.
Outstanding.
Put it.
All right, anything else on Startup 425 for Tim?
Now we're going to transition into the innovation partnership zones. As you know, the state basically rolled this program out several years ago. The idea was for the cities to look at what their strengths were and then to try to build off those strengths and to market what they have. And this, from our economic development study and our strategic plan, we found out that we have a lot of sports medicine companies. So Jen Davis-Hayes, my former counterpart, filled out the paperwork and applied, and we received the designation from the state as an innovation partnership zone for sports medicine. And we've actually got kind of one of the cooler ones up there, if you ask me. It's an interesting one. The hard part about it is it's how do some companies define themselves as sports medicine? So that's some of the criteria that committee is going to continue to work on what it means to be a sports medicine company, because some are related to sports medicine, but they're not necessarily sports medicine. But you can see that this was a program that the state rolled out. The idea was to put some marketing dollars behind it and to help the cities out. That never happened, but luckily we have the Port of Seattle, so we can actually expand on our IPZ. But this is just a screenshot of the other ones in the state.
Deputy President Batiste?
And are they, I know that we had talked about, probably years ago now, but the programs that are offered at the high schools, is that, and I don't know, that might just be Issaquah High, but are there other high schools that are starting to offer that program and really being kind of wrapped into everything about the IPZ? I'm just wondering about, coming out of those programs and having the ability to maybe do internships or that kind of thing.
So that's one of the reasons we were awarded the IPZ was because of our high schools' national recognition for their program. I don't know the answer if other high schools are expanding on that or copying it, but it is one of the reasons why we have another strength in it. And they'll be involved with the sports medicine combine that's coming up, but they're a big part of it.
It just seems to, I think it's a good question to maybe to look into, because if we're doing that at Issaquah High, and this is all about Issaquah, what else could we be doing at Skyline or at Liberty? And
Leading the workforce. Okay.
And what do we get out of it from the state being an innovation partnership zone? Is there any value for that designation?
There is. So as you know, we received a State Department of Commerce grant to host the Sports Medicine Conference to kind of help us start to market it and boost it. So that was an award for $48,500. And then the city, we requested in our economic development budget to put some money towards that as well to really boost it.
So are we seeing, getting traction,
We're just starting to kick it off.
Okay, too early. Deputy President Batiste?
so I may be jumping ahead, and if this is covered later, when we've talked about partnerships, I didn't see anything mentioned sort of more regionally in terms of the Greater Seattle Partners or the Economic Development District Board for PSRC. And so when groups are, there's a company and they're looking to come to Seattle, don't really realize that maybe based on the prices or availability, that there are a lot of other cities outside of Seattle. So how are we bringing that all together? How are we, I guess, especially in terms of the IPZ, letting people know, well, Issaquah is actually designated here, and how are those partnerships being developed?
So about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I actually had a conference call with the Greater Seattle partners, and I asked them to help me market this event when it comes up, and I talked to them about the sports medicine IPZ. The other thing that we did about 2 months ago is we invited 2 of the reps from the Greater Seattle partners out to Issaquah, and I gave them a tour around the city and talked to them about the sports medicine IPZ and showed them some of the companies and took them up to Swedish and Pro Alliance, and I wanted them to see that, so that they knew that that's what we're looking for and where our strength is. So
Okay,
that's
so
what we're
they're
trying.
starting to reach out
Yeah.
to, with the new organization, starting to reach out to the cities, and, okay.
Yeah.
I was unaware.
Oh, Councilmember Hunt.
The Innovative Partnership Zone has the associated grants. Beyond that, I guess, once that grant and the conference plays out, what's the plan beyond that?
As of now, they haven't funded any of it, so I'm not sure. I don't know what the state's plans are. There's a annual conference call where all of us get on the phone and talk about what we're doing with the IPZ. We're just starting to kind of really lift ours. I mean, there is a business plan for it. There's the concepts that we applied for the State Department grants to host a conference to kind of kickstart it. We're just now starting to kind of take it off and run with it, basically. Any other questions? And the sports medicine conference. So the first thing that I had to do is go back. So there was a group, a team, a sports medicine team that was meeting over the last several years and trying to decide what they wanted to do to market. The problem was when the funding went away. The program started to kind of dwindle. Now we've got funding because we've got the Port grant and we've got the State Department grant. So we're trying to breathe life back into it again. And we've assembled another committee. You'll see that roster in just a second. It's medical doctors, chiropractors, physical therapists, people from sports medicine backgrounds. The high school's involved, their main director for their sports medicine program. So when I first got them together and I said, what kind of a conference do you want to hold? I said, are you thinking like something at one of our hotels for the practitioners with booths set up? And we've all been to conferences. That's what I had in my mind. They steered away from that pretty quickly and they said, we don't want to do that. And I think the logic behind it was they said, basically, if we're going to reach out and say we're a hub for sports medicine, let's get it out to our own people first in our own backyard because we don't know it. They said the people around here don't know it. So let's do something for athletes in our own region for all ages and all shapes and sizes. So this is the event. It's booked for Lake Sammamish State Park. It's a free event. It's for athletes, parents, coaches, students. It's a free event to the public. The kickoff event's going to be a 5K hosted by the high school sports medicine program. So we're coordinating with them on that. It's going to be a pretty cool event. So once it started to take form, we decided it didn't look like a conference. It looks like a football combine where there's all these different things going on. So imagine the park. We've got the permit in for it right now, set up with a lot of different tents and stations, basically. And these are the courses, some of the courses that you'll see over here. It's all, the committee steered away from sports medicine a few times, and I had to get them back. You know, they thought, well, what about a class on outdoor navigation? I'm like, that sounds cool, but it's got to be sports medicine. So I'm constantly trying to bring them back into the medicine part of it. But there's the courses, and then there's some like more activity-engaged stations as well. So it's going to be a busy day. We have a goal of 1,000 for attendance. I think we're going to go over that once we start marketing it. And it just looks like a great event. I think it's going to be outstanding. It'll really start to create that awareness of the sports medicine IPZ that we have in our backyard. And I'm looking forward to it because I'm going to take my kids to it.
That's pretty cool.
It's
What's
going to be cool.
GAIT?
What's that?
What is GAIT?
A gait analysis? I had to ask the doctors. It's basically where they look at like the way that you run. So they'll put you on a treadmill set up and they'll look at your form for running, and you'll have a doctor or a physical therapist there telling you how to fix your form if you're getting injuries. Basically, it's analyzing the way you run basically and move. I know some of these are getting pretty intense.
That's pretty cool.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a busy, fun day.
That's going to be fun. Councilmember Hunt?
For the timing of this, what's the timing of the volleyball tournament?
So the volleyball tournament is June 24th, 25th, just before it. So we're going to have a booth set up there with our sports medicine booth set up there, and we'll be marketing this event at the AVP.
Okay, I wondered
Yeah.
if there's some sort of natural
So when we
connection
received this
there.
grant, we received it in July, and then they said, your deadline's July. So we've got to move pretty quick. So this committee's meeting once or twice every month, and I'm telling them basically at every meeting we need to accomplish something because July is going to come quick, and this is going to be a big event.
Seems like a lot of the people that are interested in the volleyball might also be interested.
That's what we're thinking as well. So we're going to use that AVP to market it. Any other questions on the stations?
Great.
And this is just a quick snapshot of what the committee, who's on the committee right now. It continues to grow. The more I'm out talking about the IPZ and what we're trying to work on, I have people joining it every couple weeks. So it continues to expand. Most of them are sports medicine professionals. The chamber's represented, the high school's represented. We have a few people from our city represented on it. But the important thing to keep in mind is the IPZ is just not the combine or the conference, right? It's a program. So we want these guys to continue to meet as a group every quarter as an economic sector team, just with the idea to grow that cluster, support it, and communicate it. One of the things that we need to do is establish a directory of sports medicine businesses. We're about halfway done with that. They'll continue to do that. And they want to create partnership organizations. Maybe they could get some funding out of it. So partners would be examples like REI, Kirk's, Arena Sports, people that are related to sports medicine, but not necessarily sports medicine. So they got to create the criteria of what does it mean to be a partner versus a sports medicine company. They'll establish a marketing plan. They'll help us do that. They'll assist with the outdoor rec forum that we're hosting in 2019, and then they'll assist with the AVP in some capacity. Just don't know what that'll look like yet. So this group will continue to meet after the conference. This will be an ongoing thing. Any questions on that portion?
Why no one from University of Washington or Bellevue College yet?
Just haven't found the right people.
Okay.
They'll be coming on board. We're working on, that's why I left them up there. We're still working on onboarding them. DMO. I'm glad to be out of the kitchen on this one now. So the DMO, it's up and running. They have their board of directors. I still think that they have one seat open. I'll check and let you know. I should have checked that before this. They've got their chair, Will Parkinson from the hotels. Kathy McCory from the chamber is actually the vice chair. When they did their ED search, they got over 80 responses from the east to west coast. They said all over the nation. They're fully funded. They've got their money. It's been transferred. And then they have $220,000 budgeted from the LTAC for 2019. I know that they made it down to their 3 finalists for their executive director. That should be any day. I'm looking forward to them getting their director in place so that they can start their strategic plan and their marketing and their branding. They've got a lot of work to do, but they wanted to wait to get that ED in place before they made any moves, basically. Questions on the DMO?
When do you think the ED will start?
I would think that they're going to make an offer within the next week or two, and I'd expect them in place then by March at the latest. I don't want to say earlier. I'm wrong, but I would guess March if I had to guess.
Great, thanks. Anything else?
I'll let Keith talk about jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Good evening, services. Keith Niven, Director of Economic Development. Councilmember Hunt, thank you for your questions. I'll try and answer them as I go. If I don't, please feel free to clarify. So I'm hitting cleanup tonight, and I'm talking about jobs in general, but then we'll also, I think, specifically talk about some of the things that will connect in with what Christopher and Tim talked about earlier. So what I wanted to start with is just some numbers. And you guys always kind of have an interest in what our peer cities are doing and what they look like and how we stack up in comparison. So this is kind of a lot of information. I had to put this together. It was not readily available. Some of our cities keep track of employment data, some do not. But basically what this says to me, we could spend a lot of time kind of unpacking these numbers. Where we are is right now our jobs housing ratio is 1.8. And actually I got a little bit of different information from the city of Bothell just this week. So there are 19,000 housing units for Bothell is actually 21. So that number, 38 to 21, works out to a 1.8 housing jobs ratio as well. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's information I got this week. So, as you look at it, there's some cities like Tukwila that's all jobs. And I think probably most of us kind of intuitively knew that. And then there's some other cities like Mercer Island and Sammamish that are pretty much all housing. But when I look at those ratios where we sit right now, which is it's sitting at 1.8, it's generally on par with, Redmond's a little bit of an anomaly too, but you start to think about, so Redmond's got Microsoft, Redmond's got Nintendo, they've got some fairly big employers in Redmond. And obviously Bellevue is, with kind of the development of downtown, is pushing their numbers higher. I think, I don't want to geek out on the numbers too much. All right, so, one other thing that, I would kind of draw your attention to. So if you look at kind of the average wage and the average housing cost for our city, if you make some assumptions based on a 30-year mortgage and 30% of your income going to housing and all of those kind of things, basically it would take a double income at our average wage to be able to afford our average home. And so that you could say, okay, well, most households these days are double income, so maybe that's fine. But it precludes a lot of things from happening here. If I need to make $150,000 a year to afford that home, that starts to say, okay, well, what kind of jobs are we really targeting if we're really trying to get some closer relation of our homes and our housing, our homes and our jobs to happen in the same place. So this is new information for you guys. We haven't had a chance to really talk about it, and I really don't expect kind of a lot tonight from it, other than to start to have a conversation about what these numbers might mean, and if ultimately there wants to be some additional policy direction related to employment, job types, we can talk about that. I'd like to get through the other slides, and then maybe we can cycle back and talk about some of the details, if you would like.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on that one?
Absolutely.
When you say average wage, that's the average wage of a job in Issaquah, not the average wage of an Issaquah citizen.
Average wage of a job in Issaquah.
Okay, great.
Oops, on the wrong way. All right, so one of the questions that's come up is we had a lot of conversation over the past couple years about housing. And we had, I think, a peak of households being developed in our community. And as we looked at our King County housing targets, our targets which go out to 2030, what we realized is that we are reaching our housing target prematurely because of kind of the rapid housing growth within our community. And, basically we're going to hit that, we should hit that this year, unless we have a real curtailment in housing development. The expectation is we'll hit our housing target this year. Where we are with jobs and job growth is, as you can see, the number of jobs in Issaquah are increasing. And from 2006 to 2017, we were adding about 644 jobs. We were averaging 644 jobs a year. If we want to reach our 2030 job target of 41,876, we have to basically increase by 1,000 jobs per year. Now, I'll give you some more detailed numbers on a following slide. But we can talk about whether that seems like a reasonable growth pace or not. I'm going to go to this crazy diagram. So what this is it's a locational quotient analysis of the city. And think about it, what the bubbles mean are different sectors of employment growing at different rates. So the y-axis is amount of growth. And so, you can see those percentages over on the left-hand side going from basically a decline underneath what would be the x-axis to an increase of up to 25%. And the distance they are to the right is basically what that identifies is a cluster of that employment type within the city. So it looks at the percentage of employment in that sector in our city as compared to statewide. So this is how we got to healthcare. So you can see some of these things like healthcare. Software is kind of all East King County is fairly prominent in software. This represents Costco down here. And so as we looked at what we had and what was growing, so these ones up here were the jobs over from the 2001 to 2013 timeframe. These were the employment types that were growing the fastest within the city. All right, so this is where you're looking at, okay, we're growing fast, and I want to look at something where we have maybe a cluster or a propensity for more jobs of that type than something over here, right? And so when we picked sports medicine, it had a lot to do with this locational analysis that was done by Community Attributes. Now, granted, we haven't done this for a while. These dates are a bit old. We did these things. So the city created a 4-person economic development department in 2012. And so this was one of the first things we did. And sadly, these numbers are now coming on 5 years old. And so we probably need to do that again. This is something we don't have the resources to do ourselves. We had to hire a consultant to do this work for us. But this has basically led to us deciding on sports medicine as kind of a cluster for us to focus on our marketing and efforts in economic development, because this data showed that we had a propensity for this type of employment within the city. So,
Hey, Keith, I just got to have a couple of clarifiers here. So this location quotient is kind of an interesting concept. So if I am a location quotient of 1, would it be fair for me to assume that means that the density of that type of job in this community is equal to statewide? And if I'm less than 1, that means I'm less dense than statewide. And if I'm 3.5, I'm pretty dang dense.
yes.
Okay. So if I look at that, then, and do we always look at statewide as the basis for the quotient? Or?
No, it could have been, so we picked the comparison set. It could be, you could do it nationwide. We could have done it East King County. It depends on what you want to compare yourself to. So we chose, because we were kind of all fresh coming at this from without much information at all, we said, you know what, let's see how we rank in comparison to the rest of the state. Yeah.
Anything else? Councilmember Hunt?
I understand this a lot better than I did before your explanation, so thank you for that. Is it, on the x-axis, is it a multiplier? So 3 times is 3 times as high as
It's
most
3 times.
cities? Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, so part of it is, and again, getting employment data in Washington State's really hard. It's confidential information. Most employers give their information to the state, but what we can get from the state is semi-filtered. And so we have to draw some conclusions for what this big blue blob is. You know, company management and admin services most likely is Costco, but we had to make that assumption. And so, you know, us getting another Costco was probably not in the cards, and so we basically took this bubble and said, let's forget about that bubble. What else on this diagram is interesting and is worth going after? And that's how we ended up with really focusing on the healthcare piece, but saying, you know what? We are also see ourselves as a community that's very much outdoor oriented, outdoor recreation oriented. And so we blended healthcare with kind of outdoor recreation and said, okay, what's the intersect of those two things? And that's where we came up with the sports medicine and the fact that nobody else had niched themselves in that market. So we said, let's go after that. And you're right, you guys have asked the right questions. What does that get us? It gets us nothing else than a designation on a map with the state. Now, we have to actually recertify that. Word's due again this year, is it? Next year. Next year. So the state makes us go through a recertification process. You have to show that you're actually doing something that incorporates your innovation partnership zone. We think that there's some value to that. I think, as Tim mentioned, going through the combine this year, we're going to see if it pays dividends. We think that it's going to put some attention on that employment aspect within the city, you know, and for a lot of people that might happen by the combine, they're going to be like, oh, really? Issaquah has a big sports medicine, you know, employment base? Didn't know that. It'll be, you know, if nothing else, it will promote that image within our community.
Deputy President Batiste.
And so it sounds like you did talk with Greater Seattle Partners and some of these more regional groups. So are they starting to have this data, use this data, and have that available when companies might be coming in from out of state to take a look at this area?
So such a great question, and I might defer to Tim at some point if he feels like he has something to add. So Greater Seattle Partnership is a new entity to some extent, right? It's taking the place of the EDC of Seattle King County. And what I can tell you is the practice of, either one of them is a regional economic development organization. They represent basically kind of Puget Sound, right? And what happens is an employer that's looking at moving into Puget Sound or Issaquah or Bellevue or the East King County, they typically contact the Department of Commerce. And what happens is from Department of Commerce, then it moves to the EDO that represents this area, which is now going to be the Greater Seattle Partnership. In the past, the way that the EDC worked is they would send out basically a prospect information package to the cities within their area of influence that said, you know, we've got a manufacturing business looking for 30,000 square feet of distribution space. It's in tight. And they're looking for it in East King County. If you have that space, let us know, and we'll then share that with the prospective employer. That's how it used to work. How it's going to work for Greater Seattle Partnership, I don't know, because we haven't seen that in effect yet, I don't believe. And if you want to come say something, come say something.
So in working with the Greater Seattle Partners, their goal is, like Keith said, they're kind of sending it out as a shotgun blast, and it's up to the managers for us to go through that list of prospects to say, what can we house and what can we not? What are we not even eligible for? And in Issaquah, since they're so low on land, a lot of it doesn't apply because, like you said, sometimes it's like a 400-acre hit. In talking with them, they're going to try to hone in on what each city's capable of and then send it to us. So they're going to start to filter it, basically. Does that make sense? Yeah, so they're going to start to do that for us, so we don't have to read through the whole list and go, yes, no, yes, no. And then they're trying to get out and reach out to us and come out more and more recently to figure out what we're looking for. And they're starting to get that. They know that we're very much focused on healthcare, sports medicine, and technology.
Okay. Thank you.
Part of that dynamic is having staff here that knows what's here, right? Because you get something that comes out that says, I want a 10-acre, mid-rise commercial site. If you don't have staff that knows you have land available for that and have contacts with property owners, what do you do with that email, right? And so part of, I think, the value of having kind of this department is we can actually engage with the Greater Seattle Partnership in those dialogues. And if we do get a prospect that fits our kind of space niche, then we can kind of share that with them and hopefully engage in a conversation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt?
These are the 10 largest sectors for Issaquah, is that right?
When we did this 5 years ago.
Okay. I was just thinking of other things.
I know.
That aren't there.
I know I would love to do one of these either this year or next year.
Do you think that the actual names of, do you think there would be things that fell off and that have come into the top 10 in the last few years? Okay.
I would think so.
Deputy President Batiste?
So going way back to the time when you had the consultant, do you remember how much time roughly that the consultant that was needed to put this together?
This was part of the sector analysis that we did in developing our strategic plan. I believe that the data collection piece of it was 3 months, maybe, once we executed the contract with Community Attributes. So it wasn't that much. They have a relationship with Hoover's, and Hoover's does detailed employment data for regions all across the country. And so they just have access to better database than we do. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so coming up with that so basically that then led us to, here's our top employers, and at least it was in 2014. Just going on 5 years old. And of the employers, and they're all still here, and they've all grown since 2014. But to what extent, I don't know. So this is where having old data is a little bit challenging, but it gives you guys at least an understanding of who our top employers are. And if there's any of those businesses that you guys have never heard of, then we should spend some time talking about who our local businesses are. Our local businesses are fascinating. This was one of the best parts of getting this job, is getting to meet our local businesses and finding out more about them. So that's why I provided that. So here's kind of a summary for you guys. Jobs needed per year to meet the 2030 target is 1,000. What we did in 2015, 1,800, 2016, 913, 2017, 1,265. So it's not, even though that average that I gave you guys on that graph was 644, recently we've been kind of hovering around that 1,000 number. So I'm not too concerned right now that we're going to meet our job target by 2030. But this raises that question of, well, if we've kind of been on steroids with our housing construction, and we're already at our housing target this year or maybe next if things cool down a little bit, should our jobs keep pace with our housing units? If so, that changes that number fairly dramatically, which is number 4. That changes it, that pushes it to 1,700, almost 1,800 jobs a year. If we were going to exceed our job target by the amount we'll likely exceed our housing target. That's not going to happen, most likely. So there's a conversation we could have there, and that's really the reason why I provided you with that data. So top 5 employers, you guys should know these. That's why I put them on this slide. This is your elevator speech. Our top 5 employers are Costco, Microsoft, Swedish, Siemens, and Sanmar. And then employment focus, healthcare, high tech, outdoor rec. that is, you know, if somebody was going to ask you, what does your economic development group work on? Healthcare, high tech, outdoor rec. That's our focus right now. So that's the end of my world. If you guys have questions, you know, a lot of this is, you know, when you guys asked how we picked how to spend the port money, we just sit and brainstorm. And I think that if we want to use this forum as something to help inform that in the future, I think that'd be great. I would invite more porosity between the council and ED operations on some of these things, because I think they're very important.
Any questions for Keith? Councilmember Hunt?
I had the question that I had sent you.
Yeah.
So it looks like it might be a challenging question, but I wondered about top 20 employers represent approximately 40% of all jobs. Is that typical of other cities, or do we know?
So wasn't clear on your question overall, so my apologies. So if your question was, in other similar cities, do 20 employers represent approximately 40% of the total jobs? My guess is it's going to vary all over the place. So like if, you know, just thinking about Redmond is very Microsoft, right? And so my guess is you might, if you were trying to hit that 40% of jobs number, you know, in Redmond, it might be two companies. It might be Microsoft and Nintendo, for example. You know, but we have one big one. Well, so I mean, you know, so Costco's heading, they're north of 5,000 right now.
They're on this list twice, I noticed.
Well,
Right,
one's the
wholesale and
store.
Costco,
Yeah, one's the store. And so, you know, and the store hasn't changed much. My guess is that number might be a little bigger, but generally that's going to be fairly static. But the corporate headquarters now is over 5,000. Microsoft hasn't increased their space, and my guess is that number could actually be a little lower, you know, because I think their utilization of that property that they have over by Lake Sammamish is actually kind of light. You know, Swedish is probably going to be higher because they're built out now, and they have another 500,000 square feet to build, and we're starting to meet with them quarterly to talk about that because they have a development agreement that's coming to an end sometime soon. So anyway, you know, we could go through these, but I think that, again, getting updated numbers would be really great. But maybe we'll ask in next year's budget for a little bit of money to do that.
So Keith, with the, sorry.
Go ahead.
Since you brought up the Costco development agreement and their new buildings that they're going to be building, is that going to be net new jobs, or is that going to be kind of repositioning of jobs currently in the city?
Great question. And I've asked that question a number of times, and I don't get a super clear answer. So when they started to build, and they haven't started to build yet. That's coming soon. When they submitted their permit for that building, and it's 640,000 square feet, give or take, and their existing buildings on their campus are roughly 300,000 each, right? Okay, so basically what they assumed was they were going to move their IT department, which is across from the entrance of Lake Sammamish State Park, and move some of their other off-site business people back in. Recently, what I've heard them say is they're going to move their administrative group, so their executives are going to move into the new building. They're going to move their IT people into the old building. and then maybe leave some of their off-site people off-site when they're, and when they say off-site is across 56, right? It's not like 5 miles away, it's across the street. But they believe that they're going to fill up that building and be at capacity in 2 years.
Wow.
So they're looking at where that next building is going to be already, which from an economic development standpoint, we're super excited. But it is likely that we will have at least one, maybe two empty buildings with migration onto campus once that building gets open. That's not for another like 2 years. And so there's some time for some pieces to still move around, which is why probably people aren't being super clear about that. But I think we're watching that very closely as we are the exodus of Microsoft, because that's been, since we started doing economic development in 2012, that's been kind of a threat every year, is that Microsoft's not going to renew their lease, and those working groups are going to move to Redmond. And that may happen at some point, but it hasn't happened yet. So, I think what we're talking about is if we were to get 100,000 square feet of empty Class A office space, how would we go about marketing that? How would we try to backfill that? That's a big lift, but that's something that we've been talking about.
President Batiste?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, a lot of great information and great updates as we're going forward. And I am interested, as we talked about, what the Economic Vitality Commission would look at. The incentives are very interesting to me, jobs and incentives. So it would be great to hear if there are ideas out there, what other cities are doing. And then I may have more questions coming up just about what it might take to get some of this information updated.
Okay.
Anything else? Closing thoughts? All right. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you very much.
Christopher. Thank you, Tim. The next Services and Safety Committee is scheduled for February 12th at 6:30 p.m. here in Council Chambers. And with that, we're adjourned.